The stars belonged to the Valkyrie Confederation, or so they believed after 400 years of unchallenged expansion across the galaxy. 7 different alien species had joined together under their banner, not always willingly, but always completely. And their method had proven effective time and time again. Ambassador Commander Thelrix stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Talon, watching the view screen display the small human cargo vessel that his fleet had intercepted at the edge of what these newcomers claimed as their territory. His body, tall and covered in dark blue scales, cast a long shadow across the command deck where his crew worked at their stations with practiced efficiency. A pathetic ship, remarked his tactical officer, Shenva, her 4 eyes blinking in sequence as she studied the readings. Their hull is primitive, their engines are decades behind our technology, and they carry no weapons their sensors can detect. Thelrix nodded slowly, his inner eyelids sliding closed for a moment as he considered the situation before them. The Confederation had followed this pattern so many times that it felt like a ritual now. Find a new species, demonstrate overwhelming power, accept their surrender, integrate them into the collective, and move forward to the next system. The human ship drifted ahead of them, small and insignificant against the backdrop of 50 Valkyrie warships that surrounded it like predators circling prey. Each of those warships carried enough firepower to level a city, and together they represented the might of an empire that had never known defeat in living memory. "Open a channel," Thelrix commanded, and the communications officer immediately complied, her clawed fingers dancing across the control panel with swift precision. The view screen flickered and changed to show the interior of the cargo ship's bridge, where a single human sat in the captain's chair. The creature looked remarkably fragile, with smooth skin instead of scales or chitin, no visible natural weapons, and a body that seemed poorly designed for survival in any hostile environment. "I am Ambassador Commander Thelrix of the Valkyrie Confederation," he began, his translator device converting his words into the human's language. "You have entered space claimed by the Confederation, and your presence here is a violation of our sovereignty. You will submit to immediate inspection and accept our terms of integration, or face the consequences of your defiance." The human captain, a male with graying hair and calm eyes, leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms over his chest. When he spoke, his voice carried no fear, no panic, no concern whatsoever, which Thelrix found both amusing and irritating in equal measure. "This is Captain James Mitchell of the cargo vessel Morning Star," the human said. "We're carrying medical supplies to the colony on Kepler 442, and we're operating well within the boundaries of United Earth Systems territory. I've already forwarded the details of this encounter to Fleet Command, and I suspect you'll be hearing from them shortly." Thelrix felt his crest rise slightly, a biological response to what he perceived as insolence from a lesser species. In 4 centuries, no newly discovered civilization had ever responded with such casual dismissal of Confederation power. And this human's attitude suggested either incredible ignorance or incredible stupidity. "Fleet Command," Thelrix repeated, letting derision drip from his words. "You believe your species has a fleet that concerns us, that your primitive vessels pose any threat to the Confederation's might." Captain Mitchell shrugged, a gesture that Thelrix's cultural database identified as indicating indifference or dismissal. "I don't make policy decisions, Commander. I just haul cargo and follow protocols. Fleet Command will handle diplomatic matters from here, but I'd suggest you wait for their response before doing anything you might regret." The audacity of this creature's words sparked anger in Thelrix's chest, hot and demanding action. He had given these humans a chance to surrender peacefully, to avoid bloodshed and destruction, and they had thrown it back in his face with warnings and suggestions about regret. Tactical, "Target their engines," Thelrix ordered. His voice sharp and final. "One shot. Let them drift without power. And then we'll see how defiant they feel." Shenva hesitated, her claws hovering over the firing controls. "Commander, if they truly have contacted their fleet, then their fleet will arrive to find the wreckage of a ship whose captain chose pride over wisdom," Thelrix interrupted, his patience exhausted by this delay and questioning. "Fire." The Eternal Talon released a single plasma lance, a beam of superheated energy that crossed the distance between the two ships in less than a heartbeat. It struck the cargo vessel's engine section with devastating precision, and the explosion that followed consumed the entire aft portion of the ship in brilliant blue flame. Captain Mitchell's face remained on the viewscreen for just a moment longer, his expression changing from calm to resignation as he realized what was happening. Then the screen went dark as the morning star broke apart, scattering debris and atmosphere into the void of space. "Scan for survivors," Thelrix ordered, though he already knew the answer. No escape pods had launched, no life signs remained, and the human ship had been reduced to twisted metal and frozen corpses drifting among the stars. "None." "Commander," Shenva confirmed, her voice quieter now, perhaps affected by the casual brutality of what they had just done. "The vessel is completely destroyed." Thelrix returned to his command chair and settled into it, feeling satisfied that the lesson had been delivered. Surely now the humans would understand the price of defiance. Surely now they would send representatives to negotiate their surrender and integration into the Confederation. "Maintain position here," he commanded. "When the humans send their diplomats, we'll be waiting to accept their submission. Alert all ships to remain vigilant, but I doubt these primitives will try anything foolish." The hours passed slowly after that, with the fleet holding formation at the edge of human space, weapons ready but inactive, sensors sweeping the surrounding systems for any sign of approaching vessels. Thelrix spent the time reviewing data about humanity, learning about their homeworld, their short history of space travel, their relatively small number of colonized systems, everything. He confirmed his initial assessment. Humans were newcomers to the galactic stage, barely a century into their expansion beyond their home system, lacking the advanced technology or military power to pose any real threat to the Confederation. They were prey animals playing at being predators, and soon they would learn their proper place in the hierarchy. 3 days after the destruction of the Morning Star, the sensors began registering anomalies at the far edge of the system. Shenva brought the readings to Thelrix's attention, her expression troubled by what the instruments were showing. "Commander, something is emerging from faster-than-light travel," she reported, pulling up the tactical display on the main view screen. "The displacement signature is massive, larger than anything in our databases, but it's moving slowly, taking its time to fully transition into normal space." Thelrix studied the readings with growing interest, noting the unusual energy patterns and the sheer scale of the distortion. Perhaps the humans were sending a colony ship, he thought, packed with civilians and diplomats ready to beg for mercy and protection. "All ships to combat readiness," he ordered, more out of protocol than actual concern. "Prepare to intercept and escort the vessel to our position. Let's show these humans how generous we can be to those who accept Confederation authority." The distortion grew larger on the sensors, bending space around it like a stone pressing into fabric, and Thelrix leaned forward in his chair, eager to see what desperate gesture humanity would make in response to their loss. The ship that emerged from faster-than-light travel was not a colony vessel, not a diplomatic cruiser, not a merchant convoy seeking mercy. It was something that defied Thelrix's understanding of naval architecture, military strategy, and the basic principles of spacecraft design that every spacefaring civilization in the galaxy seemed to follow. The UESS Retribution dropped into normal space like a mountain tearing itself free from the ground and learning to fly. And for several long seconds, the sensors on every Valkyrie ship struggled to map its full dimensions, because nothing in their databases had prepared them for something of this scale. 47 kilometers, Shenva whispered, her voice barely audible as she read the measurements that kept scrolling across her tactical display. Commander, the vessel is 47 kilometers from bow to stern, and its mass readings are off our standard scales. Taurix felt his blood run cold despite the climate controls keeping the bridge at optimal temperature. He had seen dreadnoughts before, had commanded battles against species who built massive warships to intimidate their enemies. But those vessels had been 2, maybe 3 kilometers long at most, and they had been considered impressive examples of engineering and military might. This thing before them was something else entirely. Something that made his 50 warships look like scavenger fish swimming near a leviathan. The Retribution hung in space with a presence that seemed to bend reality around it. Its hull dark and studded with thousands of weapon emplacements, sensor arrays, shield generators, and systems whose purpose the Valkyrie scanners could not even begin to identify. Status report, Taurix demanded, trying to keep his voice steady and authoritative, even as his mind raced through scenarios and calculations, trying to find some way that this situation made tactical sense. The whole composition is unlike anything we've encountered, the science officer reported from her station, her tentacles writhing in agitation as she processed the incoming data. Our scans are having difficulty penetrating it, but preliminary analysis suggests multiple layers of armor plating, energy-absorbent materials, and some kind of reactive shielding that adapts to sensor frequencies. Shenva pulled up a wireframe diagram of the human ship, and the tactical display highlighted weapon signatures across its surface. Confirmed weapon systems, approximately 4,200 individual emplacements, ranging from point defense turrets to what appear to be ship-to-ship cannon batteries. There are also 16 launch tubes that our computers classify as torpedo or missile systems, each large enough to accommodate warheads in the megaton range. The numbers kept coming, each one more impossible than the last, each one driving home the reality that the Confederation had stumbled into something beyond their experience. This was not a ship built for exploration or trade, not a vessel designed with efficiency or economy in mind, but a weapon forged with a single purpose: absolute dominance in combat. They haven't powered weapons yet, Shenva added, though her tone suggested this information provided little comfort. Shields are active but at minimal strength, and they're holding position exactly 1 million kilometers from our fleet. Thelrix stared at the massive ship on his view screen, trying to understand the psychology of a species that would build something like this. The resources required to construct a vessel of this size would bankrupt most civilizations. The engineering challenges would occupy entire generations of scientists and builders, and the tactical implications of deploying such a ship suggested a military doctrine focused on overwhelming force rather than strategic flexibility. Why, he muttered, more to himself than to his crew. Why build something so massive, so impractical, so far beyond anything necessary for normal naval operations? No one on the bridge offered an answer. Perhaps because they were all asking themselves the same question. Perhaps because they already knew the answer and didn't want to voice it aloud. The communication system chimed, indicating an incoming transmission from the human vessel, and Thelrix gestured for his officer to accept it. The view screen shifted to show the bridge of the Retribution, and the contrast with the cargo ship from 3 days ago could not have been more stark. The human who appeared on screen wore a dark uniform with numerous insignia and decorations, her hair pulled back in a severe style, her posture radiating confidence and controlled aggression. Behind her, Thelrix could see dozens of crew members working at stations that seemed to stretch back into the distance. A bridge that could have housed his entire flagship with room to spare. "I am Fleet Admiral Sarah Chun of the United Earth Systems Navy," the woman said. A voice calm and professional, but carrying an edge that suggested emotions held firmly in check. "3 days ago, you intercepted and destroyed the cargo vessel Morning Star, killing Captain James Mitchell and his crew of 17 personnel who were engaged in peaceful transport of medical supplies to a human colony." Thelrix opened his mouth to respond, to explain the protocols of first contact and the necessity of demonstrating Confederation authority. But Admiral Chun continued speaking without pause, without giving him the opportunity to justify or defend his actions. Captain Mitchell followed proper procedure when confronted by unknown hostile forces, she said. He identified himself and his ship. He informed you that he had contacted Fleet Command, and he attempted to de-escalate the situation through diplomatic communication. Your response was to murder him and his crew without warning, without provocation, and without any legitimate military justification. The words hit Thelrix like physical blows, each one stripping away the certainty he had felt when ordering that fatal shot. He had acted according to Confederation protocol, had done exactly what was expected of an ambassador commander encountering a defiant species. But hearing his actions described in such stark terms made them sound less like military necessity and more like casual brutality. You will withdraw all forces from United Earth Systems territory within 1 hour, Admiral Chen stated, and there was no negotiation in her tone. No room for discussion or debate. You will transmit an official apology to Earth Command, along with full details of the incident and the names of all personnel involved in the attack. You will also provide compensation for the families of the deceased crew members, in an amount to be determined by our diplomatic corps. Thelrix found his voice at last, though it sounded weaker than he would have liked. You make demands of the Confederation as if you have the power to enforce them, as if one ship, no matter how large, can threaten an entire fleet. Admiral Chun's expression didn't change, didn't show anger or amusement or any emotion that Thelrix could read and interpret. 1 hour, Commander. I suggest you use that time wisely. The transmission ended abruptly, leaving the Velkari bridge in silence that felt heavier than the void outside. Thelrix looked around at his crew, seeing his own uncertainty reflected in their faces, their body language, their reluctance to meet his gaze directly. Contact Confederation Command, he ordered. Request instructions on how to proceed, and transmit all sensor data on the human vessel. They need to understand what we're facing here. The communications officer worked quickly, sending the encrypted message back toward Confederation space. But the response time would be measured in hours rather than minutes, and the clock that Admiral Chun had started was already counting down toward 0. Commander, Shemba said hesitantly, if we withdraw now, it will be seen as weakness, as an admission that the Confederation can be intimidated by displays of force. Every species in our territory will see what happened here, and they may begin to question whether our authority is as absolute as we've claimed. She was right. Thelrix knew, but she was also missing the larger picture. If they stayed and fought, if they tested the capabilities of that massive human ship and found themselves on the losing side, the damage to Confederation prestige would be far worse than a tactical withdrawal. Prepare the fleet for combat operations, he ordered, making the decision that his training and pride demanded, even as a small voice in the back of his mind screamed warnings about hubris and folly. If the humans want to demonstrate their power, then we'll give them the opportunity. 50 ships against one, no matter how large that one might be. The bridge crew moved to execute his orders. Weapons coming online across the fleet, targeting solutions being calculated and distributed, shield generators ramping up to maximum strength. Thelrix watched the preparations with a mixture of determination and dread, knowing that the next hour would determine not just his own fate, but possibly the future of the entire Confederation on his view screen. The Retribution continued to hang in space, silent and still and patient, waiting for the hour to expire and the shooting to begin. The hour passed with agonizing slowness as both fleets maintained their positions, weapons armed and ready, crews tense with anticipation of violence that seemed increasingly inevitable. Thelrix had received no response from Confederation Command, leaving him alone with his decision and the weight of responsibility for what was about to happen. "Time," Shenva announced quietly, and Thelrix felt the moment stretch out before him like a chasm he was about to leap across. "All ships," he broadcast across the fleet command channel. "Open fire, concentrated barrage on the human vessel's forward sections, targeting what appear to be primary weapon systems. Show them that size alone does not guarantee victory." 50 Valkyrie warships unleashed their arsenals simultaneously, and space lit up with the deadly light of plasma lances, antimatter torpedoes, particle beams, and kinetic projectiles launched at relativistic speeds. It was enough firepower to crack a planet's crust, enough destructive energy to vaporize anything smaller than a moon. And it all converged on the Retribution in a beautiful and terrible display of military might. The weapons struck the human ship's shields and simply disappeared, absorbed by energy barriers that didn't even flicker under the assault. Thelrix watched in growing horror as his fleet's opening salvo, their most powerful first strike, accomplished absolutely nothing against the massive dreadnought that floated serenely in the void, shields holding at 98%. Shenva reported, her voice hollow with disbelief. No structural damage detected, no power fluctuations, no indication that our weapons affected them in any meaningful way. Before Thelrix could issue new orders, the Retribution finally responded, but not with the devastating main weapons that his tactical officers had identified and cataloged with such fearful precision. Instead, the ship activated only its point defense systems, the smaller turrets designed to intercept incoming missiles and fighters during close combat. "Incoming fire?" someone shouted from across the bridge, and Thelrix gripped the arms of his command chair as the first human weapons found their targets. The Pender targets, the Bayanos. Valkyrie destroyer's swift talon died first, its shields overloaded by precisely aimed energy beams that struck its reactor in a sequence, calculated to maximize destruction while minimizing energy expenditure. The ship broke apart in a silent explosion that scattered crew and debris across several thousand kilometers of space. Then, the cruiser Eternal Watch followed, its engines torn apart by railgun rounds that punched through armor plating like it was tissue paper, leaving the vessel tumbling and helpless before follow-up shots finished what the first volley had started. Evasive maneuvers, Thelrix ordered desperately. All ships scatter and maintain firing patterns, but the Retribution wasn't just firing blindly into the fleet. Each shot was calculated, each beam and projectile aimed with computer-guided precision that took into account ship movements, shield frequencies, structural weaknesses, and a dozen other factors that the Valkyrie tactical computers couldn't track fast enough to counter. The battleship Iron Victory tried to close distance, its captain apparently believing that proximity would limit the human ship's ability to target effectively. But the Retribution simply adjusted its firing solution and eliminated the vessel with a sustained burst that overwhelmed its shields and carved through its hull in a matter of seconds. "They're not even using their main guns," Shenva said, her voice breaking slightly as she watched another 3 ships disappear from the tactical display. "Commander, these are point defense weapons, designed to shoot down missiles and small craft, and they're destroying capital ships like they're nothing." Thelrix knew she was right. knew that every second he continued this engagement was condemning more of his people to death. But pride and fear of the consequences held him in his chair. To retreat now would be to admit complete defeat. To acknowledge that humanity possessed power so far beyond the Confederation that resistance was meaningless. The Carrier Mother's Grace launched its full complement of fighters. Dozens of small attack craft that swarmed toward the human dreadnought in a desperate attempt to overwhelm its defenses through sheer numbers. The Retribution responded by activating what appeared to be automated targeting systems, and the fighters began to explode one by one, picked off with casual efficiency by weapons that never missed and never hesitated. How? Full reverse. The carrier's captain broadcast on the fleet channel, panic evident in his voice. All remaining ships, retreat 2. The transmission ended as the Mother's Grace took a direct hit from something larger than point defense. One of the human ship's secondary batteries that tore the carrier in half with a single shot that suggested the Retribution was getting tired of this game. 11 minutes had passed since the start of the battle, and 40 Valkyrie ships were gone, reduced to expanding clouds of superheated gas and twisted metal. The remaining 10 ships, including Thelric's flagship, were already turning away, their captains making the same calculation that their commander had been too slow to accept. "Power down weapons," Thelric's ordered, his voice barely above a whisper. "Broadcast surrender on all frequencies, and pray to whatever god still listen that the humans are merciful." The Eternal Talon's weapons went dark, and across the battered remnants of the fleet, the other surviving ships followed suit. They hung in space like broken toys, their shields damaged, their crews traumatized, their purpose shattered by 11 minutes of combat that had been less a battle and more an execution. Admiral Chun's face appeared on the view screen once more, and Thelrix forced himself to meet her gaze, even though every instinct screamed at him to look away, to hide from the judgment he saw in her eyes. "You were given a choice, Commander," she said, and there was no triumph in her voice, no satisfaction at the victory she had just achieved. "You could have withdrawn peacefully, could have avoided this bloodshed, but you chose to test us instead. I hope the lesson was worth the lives of your crew members." Thelrix wanted to argue, wanted to explain that he had been following orders and protocol, that the decision to fight had been forced on him by circumstances and duty. But the words died in his throat because he knew they would sound like the excuses of a coward. "We surrender," he managed to say, the words tasting like ash and defeat. "We will withdraw immediately and transmit all information you requested, along with a full accounting of our losses here." Admiral Chun nodded slowly. "You will also transmit a complete recording of this engagement to your Confederation command, with no edits, no modifications, and no attempts to minimize what happened here. They need to see what humanity is capable of when provoked, and they need to understand that we will defend our people and our territory with whatever force proves necessary. It will be done." Thelrix agreed, because there was no other answer he could give. "One more thing, Commander," Admiral Chun said, and now her voice carried an edge that made Thelric's S-scales prickle with instinctive fear. "Tell your people what you witnessed here today. Tell them about this ship and the power it represents. But also tell them this: the Retribution is one of 12 Titan-class vessels in the United Earth Systems Navy. And what you saw today was this ship operating at less than half its combat capacity." The implications of those words crashed over Thelrix like a wave of ice water. If this ship had been holding back, if it had destroyed 40 warships while barely trying, then what would happen if humanity ever decided to use its full strength against the Confederation? "We came to the stars seeking trade and friendship," Admiral Chun continued. "We extended our hand in peace to every species we encountered, and we genuinely hoped that we could build something better than the cycle of conquest and submission that seems to dominate this part of the galaxy. But we also learn from our own history that peace must be backed by strength. That kindness without power is just an invitation for predators. She paused, letting her words sink in, letting Thelrix fully comprehend the philosophy that had driven humanity to build ships like the Retribution. Weapons platforms that could end civilizations, but existed primarily as deterrents rather than tools of aggression. Go home? Commander, Admiral Chun said finally, tell your leaders what happened here. And tell them that Earth is willing to negotiate a formal peace treaty, but only between equals. If the Confederation attempts to treat us as subjects or prey, they will discover just how far humanity is willing to go to protect its sovereignty. The transmission ended, and Thelrix sat in his command chair, staring at the view screen that now showed only the Retribution holding position among the debris field that had once been his fleet. The massive ship made no move to pursue, made no threatening gestures, simply waited and watched as the survivors limped away toward Confederation space. Set course for home, Thelrix ordered, his voice heavy with exhaustion and shame. And someone start preparing that report for command. They're not going to believe this, but they need to know what we've stumbled into. The recording of the battle spread through the Confederation faster than any official report could have traveled. Copied and transmitted from ship to ship, system to system, until every species in the Alliance had seen what happened when their fleet encountered humanity's Retribution. The footage was grainy in places, distorted by the electromagnetic chaos of combat. But the essential truth came through clearly enough. Analysts across dozens of worlds watched the 11-minute engagement on endless replay, their computers breaking down every shot, every maneuver, every tactical decision made by both sides. What they discovered was simultaneously enlightening and terrifying. A glimpse into military capabilities that exceeded the Confederation's understanding of what was possible. The human vessel never exceeded 40% power output. A Valkyrie military strategist reported to the Confederation Council, his scales pale with stress as he presented his findings. We can see this clearly in the energy signatures captured by our sensors. The Retribution was operating well below its maximum capacity throughout the entire engagement, treating our fleet as something between a training exercise and a minor nuisance. The council members, representatives from all 7 species that comprised the Confederation, sat in stunned silence as the analyst continued his presentation. They had all seen the battle footage, had all witnessed the casual efficiency with which humanity's ship had dismantled their military forces. But hearing it broken down in technical terms made it somehow worse. Furthermore, the analyst continued, pulling up comparative data on his display, the weapons that destroyed our vessels were classified as point defense systems, designed primarily for intercepting missiles, fighters, and other small threats during capital ship engagements. The Retribution never activated its primary armament, never deployed its torpedo systems, and never utilized what we believe to be its main gun batteries. A council member from the insectoid Threx species raised one of her forelimbs, gesturing at the holographic display that showed the Retribution in all its massive glory. How is such a ship even possible? How does any civilization achieve the engineering necessary to build and operate something of that scale? The question prompted a different analyst to step forward. This one from the intelligence division rather than military operations. She carried a data tablet filled with information that her team had been compiling over the past weeks. Research into humanity's history and development that painted a disturbing picture. We made the mistake of judging humanity based on their relatively short time in space, she began, her voice carrying the weight of uncomfortable truths. They have been traveling beyond their home system for only 120 years, colonizing new worlds for less than a century, and we assumed this meant they were primitives. Newcomers who had not yet learned the realities of galactic power structures. She activated her tablet and projected images of Earth onto the chamber's main display. A blue and green world that looked deceptively peaceful from orbit. What we failed to understand is that humanity evolved on what can only be classified as a death world. A planet so hostile to life that most species would have gone extinct trying to colonize it. The images shifted to show Earth's gravity, its weather patterns, its predatory ecosystems. And the council members shifted uncomfortably as they realized what they were seeing. Humans had developed under conditions that would have crushed most spacefaring races. In an environment where everything from microorganisms to megafauna was actively trying to kill them. High gravity, extreme temperature variations, aggressive disease vectors, and an evolutionary history dominated by predation and competition. The intelligence analyst listed methodically. Humans are persistence hunters who evolved to chase prey until it collapsed from exhaustion. They developed sophisticated tool use specifically for killing other creatures. And their entire biology is optimized for survival in conditions that most of us would find lethal. More images appeared, these showing humanity's recorded history. And the violence contained in those records was staggering, even by Confederation standards. Wars that lasted generations, weapons that became increasingly destructive with each technological advancement, conflicts that killed millions and shaped entire civilizations. They fought each other for thousands of years before achieving spaceflight, the analyst said, her voice quiet but carrying clearly through the chamber. They developed nuclear weapons, chemical weapons, biological weapons, and they used them on their own species during conflicts whose scale and brutality dwarf anything in our historical records. The only reason Earth survived to reach the space age is because humans eventually learned that mutual annihilation was not a viable strategy. The council chamber remained silent as the presentation continued. Each new revelation adding to the growing understanding that the Confederation had not merely encountered a new species, but had stumbled into conflict with something fundamentally different from anything they had faced before. Current intelligence estimates put humanity's total population at 12 billion across 230 colonized systems, the analyst reported. Their industrial capacity is heavily militarized, with approximately 40% of their economic output directed toward defense and security. They maintain a standing navy of 800 capital ships, thousands of support vessels, and those 12 Titan-class dreadnoughts that Admiral Chun mentioned in her transmission. A new image appeared, showing not just the retribution but data on all 12 Titan-class vessels, each one a monument to humanity's philosophy of overwhelming force and deterrence. Their names alone suggested the mindset of their builders. Retribution, vengeance, defiance, indomitable, unstoppable, relentless, and 6 others that carried similar messages of implacable resolve. What is their fleet doctrine? What strategic philosophy drives this level of militarization? Asked a council member from the crystalline shard species, his facets reflecting the light in patterns that indicated deep concern. The facets reflecting the light in patterns that indicated deep concern. The intelligence analyst gestured to another section of her report. Based on intercepted communications and observed behavior, human military doctrine can be summarized as peace through strength. They believe that overwhelming defensive capability prevents aggression, that potential enemies will choose diplomacy over conflict if the cost of war is clearly unacceptable. But that's exactly what the Confederation does, protested a Valkyrie council member. We show force to achieve submission. We use our military superiority to integrate new species peacefully. No, the analyst corrected gently. The Confederation uses force to compel obedience, to demonstrate that resistance is futile and integration is inevitable. Humanity uses force to ensure they are never compelled by anyone, to guarantee that they always have the option to choose peace rather than having it forced upon them. The difference is subtle but fundamental. The distinctions seem to resonate through the council chamber, creating ripples of understanding and discomfort among the assembled representatives. The Confederation had built its empire on the assumption that might made right, that superior power justified dominance. But humanity had taken that same principle and twisted it into something defensive rather than aggressive. What do they want? Someone asked. And the question hung in the air like smoke. According to intercepted diplomatic communications, they want trade agreements, cultural exchange programs, and mutual defense pacts with neighbors, the analyst replied. They're genuinely interested in peaceful coexistence, in learning from other species and sharing their own knowledge and technology. The problem is that they're also absolutely unwilling to accept any relationship that isn't based on mutual respect and equality. The implications were clear and unavoidable. The Confederation could not integrate humanity through intimidation, could not force them into submission through military action, and could not treat them as inferiors, without risking a war that would likely destroy the Confederation itself. 3 of our member species have already opened back-channel communications with Earth, the intelligence analyst added, and this revelation caused immediate uproar in the chamber. Representatives shouting accusations and demanding explanations. The Threx, the Wanderers, and the Silent Ones have all initiated diplomatic contact with humanity independently of the Confederation's official position. She continued once order was restored. They're seeking separate peace treaties, trade agreements, and technology exchanges, effectively breaking ranks because they believe humanity represents both an opportunity and a threat that requires immediate engagement. The council chamber descended into chaos as different factions argued for different approaches. Some wanted to escalate, to gather the full might of the Confederation and crush humanity before they could spread further, while others advocated for immediate peace negotiations and acceptance of humans as equals rather than subjects in the midst of the arguing and political maneuvering. The intelligence analyst shared one final piece of information that she had been saving for last. We also received confirmation that Ambassador Commander Thelrix has been formally charged with incompetence and reckless endangerment of Confederation forces. He's being court-martialed, and new leadership is being appointed to handle the human situation going forward. The diplomatic delegation from Earth arrived at the neutral space station 6 weeks after the battle. Their transport ship escorted by 3 human destroyers that made the Valkyrie security forces nervous, despite being smaller than anything the Confederation would classify as a capital vessel. The station itself was a marvel of cooperative engineering, built by 5 different species as a demonstration of what peaceful collaboration could achieve. Ambassador Sarah Okonkwo stepped off the transport with the practiced grace of someone who had negotiated peace treaties on a dozen different worlds, her dark skin and silver-streaked hair marking her as someone who had seen much in her 60 years of life. She wore formal diplomatic attire rather than a military uniform, a deliberate choice meant to signal Earth's preference for peaceful resolution, despite the very visible military capability that humanity had. Demonstrated the Confederation's new diplomatic corps, hastily assembled and carefully selected to represent all 7 member species without any single faction dominating the negotiations, waited in the station's main conference chamber. They had spent weeks preparing for this meeting, studying human psychology, cultural norms, and negotiation tactics gleaned from intercepted communications and academic databases. But no amount of preparation could fully ease the tension in the room as Ambassador Okonkwo entered, followed by her team of advisors, translators, and military liaisons. Every Confederation representative present had seen the battle footage, had watched the Retribution dismantle their fleet with casual efficiency, and that knowledge colored every interaction with these humans. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with us," Ambassador Okonkwo began, her voice warm and professional as she took her seat at the large circular table that dominated the conference chamber. "Earth values diplomacy above all else, and we're hopeful that we can reach an understanding that benefits all parties involved." The Confederation's lead negotiator, a Valkyrie diplomat named Soros, who had built her career on conflict resolution, nodded carefully. "The Confederation acknowledges the regrettable incident at your border, and we're prepared to discuss appropriate responses to what occurred there." "Regrettable incident," Ambassador Okonkwo repeated. And though her tone remained pleasant, something in her eyes suggested she found the phrasing insufficient. "Ambassador Commander Thelrix destroyed a civilian vessel without provocation, killing 18 people who were engaged in legitimate commerce within our territory. That's not an incident. That's an act of war. And only Earth's commitment to peaceful resolution has prevented this situation from escalating into full-scale conflict." The bluntness of her words sent ripples of discomfort through the Confederation delegation. But Okonkwo continued before anyone could formulate a response. "However, we're not here to assign blame or demand punishment. We're here to establish a framework for future interactions between our peoples, one that ensures this kind of tragedy never happens again." She gestured to one of her aides, who activated a holographic display showing a proposed treaty structure that Earth had drafted as a starting point for negotiations. The terms were straightforward and reasonable, calling for mutual recognition of territorial boundaries, establishment of trade relations, exchange of diplomatic personnel, and creation of joint commissions to handle disputes peacefully. Earth is willing to accept a formal apology from the Confederation and compensation for the families of the deceased crew members, Okonkwo stated. "In exchange, we'll consider the matter closed and move forward with establishing normal diplomatic relations. We have no interest in revenge, retribution, or territorial expansion at the Confederation's expense." Soros studied the proposed treaty carefully, noting the absence of demands for concessions, war reparations, or the kind of punitive measures that a victor might normally impose on a defeated opponent. "These terms are remarkably generous given what occurred and what your military demonstrated itself capable of achieving. We demonstrated what we're capable of defending," Ambassador Okonkwo corrected gently. "Not what we're interested in conquering. There's a significant difference between those two things, and understanding the difference is crucial to building a lasting peace between our peoples." The negotiations continued throughout the day and into the evening, with both sides working through the details of trade agreements, technology exchange programs, and security protocols. The Confederation representatives found themselves constantly surprised by humanity's willingness to compromise on minor points while remaining absolutely firm on issues of sovereignty and respect. During a break in the formal discussions, a young Valkyrie junior diplomat named Vexna found herself sharing a refreshment area with Admiral Sarah Chun, who had arrived partway through the day as a military advisor to the Earth delegation. The Admiral stood by one of the viewing ports, watching ships come and go from the station with the focused attention of someone who never stopped analyzing tactical situations. "May I ask you something, Admiral?" Vexna said hesitantly, unsure if approaching the officer was appropriate, but driven by curiosity that had been gnawing at her since she first saw the battle footage. Admiral Chun turned to face her, and though her expression was serious, there was no hostility in her eyes. "Of course. Ask whatever you'd like. Why did you build the Retribution?" Vexna asked. The question that had been troubling so many people across the Confederation. Why construct something so massive, so powerful, so far beyond what any reasonable defensive doctrine would require? The resources, the effort, the commitment it represents. It all seems excessive, unless your intention was always to dominate through military supremacy. Admiral Chun was quiet for a long moment, her gaze returning to the viewport and the stars beyond. Have you studied human history at all? Our time before we reached the stars. Some, Vexna admitted. Enough to know that your species has a violent past. Violent, Chun repeated, almost smiling at the understatement. Yes, that's one way to describe it. Humans spent thousands of years fighting each other over resources, ideology, territory, and sometimes just because we were afraid of people who looked or thought differently than we did. We built weapons of incredible destructive power, and we used them multiple times, leaving scars on our world and our collective psyche that still haven't fully healed. She paused, organizing her thoughts before continuing. In the 20th century, by our calendar, we developed nuclear weapons, bombs that could destroy entire cities in seconds. And we used them in war, twice, killing hundreds of thousands of people in moments. The horror of what we created finally convinced us that there had to be another way, that continuing down that path would lead to nothing but extinction. Vexna listened intently, trying to imagine the psychological weight of a species coming so close to destroying itself. We learned that peace doesn't come from being harmless, Admiral Chun said. It comes from being capable of terrible violence, but choosing not to use it. The retribution exists because we've seen what happens when you're not strong enough to protect what matters. When you're vulnerable and others decide to exploit that vulnerability. She turned to face Vexna directly, her expression serious but not unkind. We've lost colonies to disease, to equipment failures, to accidents and disasters that we couldn't prevent, because we didn't have the resources or the technology in place to save our people. Every time it happened, we had to sit helplessly and watch people die. And we swore we would never feel that helpless again. So the retribution is a promise, Vexna said slowly, understanding beginning to dawn. A promise that you'll never be unable to defend your people. Exactly, Chun confirmed. It's a promise to every human living in the frontier colonies that if something threatens them, if someone attacks them, they won't die alone and forgotten while Earth does nothing. It's a promise that we have the capability to project power across our entire territory, to respond to any threat with overwhelming force if necessary. But you don't want to use that force, Vexna observed. No, Admiral Chun agreed. We really don't. Every person who died when we destroyed Thelric's S-fleet was someone's child, someone's friend, someone's loved one. And their deaths will haunt me for the rest of my life, even though I know I made the only choice possible under the circumstances. She looked back out at the stars. The retribution exists so that hopefully no one else has to die. Because once word spreads about what happened at your border, other species will think twice before threatening human territory or harming human civilians. The ship is a deterrent, a shield, and yes, a weapon when absolutely necessary. But its primary purpose is to prevent war rather than wage it. Vexna found herself nodding slowly, the pieces finally fitting together into a coherent picture. You built ships that could terrify the galaxy so that you'd have the option to choose peace. We build ships that ensure peace is a choice rather than a condition imposed on us by someone stronger. Chun clarified. That's the difference between us and the Confederation. You use strength to force submission. We use strength to guarantee freedom. The conversation ended as they were called back to the negotiation table. But Vexna found herself viewing the entire diplomatic process differently.